Greetings, ladies and managers, and welcome to this latest narration of the web series The Nature of Predators. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 155. Memory transcription subject, Chief Hunter Isif, Arcs Rebellion Command. Date, Standardized Human Time, March 10th, 2137. 20,000 foes remain active in the system. I wasn't sure how the Terrans planned to gain the Dirtian Shield's compliance with their plans. If the local remnants, figuring out about half of their invading forces' tally, surged towards the Kolshians, it would take our support much more effective. Their motivations for aggressive actions was obvious. The Withkalkwa rocked by antimatter bombs, planetary defenses were long since gone, and our rescue operations was the only reason their last remaining forces hadn't been cut down by overwhelming opposition. The Yodel's particle beams gave us a chance, especially since they lacked the recharging requirements of plasma weaponry. Enemy drones had invested their focus on technocracy pesky vessels, giving the Dirtians some breathing room. Most of the human drone aides perished in the initial engagement, protecting life and limb over unbreathing, unfeeling metal. I was pleased that the Dirtian hadn't turned their guns on us or the UN, but I suppose even they wouldn't be foolish enough to invite extinction. It was easy to claim that there was better not to exist than to bow to a predator's whims, when that ultimatum wasn't staring a herbivore in the face. Self-preservation was an instinct that transcended all classes of life form. With the multi-Dragzoon and the Federation subsidiary driven out by us, there was hope of keeping some of the Kalkwa's infrastructure intact. I winced, thinking what percentage of the populace lived in the cities that had already been hit. Per my documents, the last census data suggests a population of about 6.5 billion, including foreigners and work visas for diplomatic stays. It's a smaller number than the amount of people on Earth, largely due to the constant casualties brought on by this endless war. It was important to take inventory of exactly what was transpiring around my command ship. Through the near-microscopic dots Kaisel had highlighted, I could glimpse human nano-drones in on the fly. The Dirtian Shield seemed to lack a strategy with their remaining ships, with every unit operating out of independent desperation. The Yodel were being pounded by any drone that could burn towards them, and could only fend off so many guns-blazing foes, even with exemplary flying. It was obvious where our plasma support was best spent. If humanity's manships had taken on automatons in prior engagement, there was no reason Oxel crews couldn't hold our own, too. It would reflect poorly on my abilities as a commander if we couldn't drive the Kolshians out in one fell swoop. Focus plasma on targets who are in pursuit of the Yodel. Save our missiles for any Kolshians who come for us, I ordered. Kaisel narrowed his eyes. Understood, sir. I've forwarded a handful of possible targets that are almost in range of our weapons. Lisa looked up from a spot beside Bandarenka. Sir, if I may, I've been informed that the Dirtian have been persuaded to charge the enemy. All of our ducks are in a row. It happens right now, all at once. We'll be throwing everything but the kitchen sink at them, Oleski declared with a chipper grin. Everything but the kitchen sink. The idiom didn't compute with me, and I figured I could attempt to utilize human levity to build rapport with my crew. If I was going to bring Oxel back to our old ways, and I couldn't learn from vices, it would behoove me to replicate the Terran's bedside manner. That saying does not make sense. Why would we be throwing a faucet tool into a space battle? Is this a remark on using anything as a weapon? Well, not that we wouldn't, you know. There were secret programs that can use cats as acoustic listening devices. The saying was popularized during our Second World War, or so I hear. Anything usable went into the war efforts, so I guess it took off then. I regret ever asking to learn more about your inane rationale. Let me know if the United Nations is anything useful to impart, rather than using confusing excerpts about household appliances. Yes, sir. It is about to get serious, for sure. You could say that we're about to go out of the frying pan and into the fire. You think it's funny to use this idiom after I warned you, yes? You're lucky your government would not tolerate me breaking your ankles like I did Kaisel's. The Oxel grunt winced, drawing his tail closer.
Do not remind me, sir. Given that humans must chow their food, and their culture, like ours, revolves around eating meat, it computes that kitchenware is a priceless contributor to their daily lives. I can see why the Dirtian would be relegated to the kitchen sink, as incompetent herbivores without a shred of common sense. I do not expect their charge to be useful or deliver on its promised effects.
A bunch of inadequate resources together may be enough. Is that not correct? The Terrans must have completed a similar assessment in their stratagems. We are to save the herbivores and do our part, lest we look like bumbling idiots like the Dirtian.
Understood. I am on it.
Our weapon station was attempting to lock onto Kolshin's drones, utilizing the data that Kaisel had forwarded. Several captains in the rebel fleet were coordinating their fire, cultivating synchronicity to deal massive amounts of damage once we drew within range. The Yodel were clever enough to keep just ahead of the enemy pursuers and to slowly loop towards us on an indirect path. They were routing the Federation fleet towards us, which would make it easier to get a crack at our targets. Power was diverted away from non-essential systems aboard my command vessel, ensuring that our initial volley was sizzling with intensity. The dazzling flashes of thousands of plasma beams fired off in unison was an impressive display of control. The robots could dodge through some of the plasma, calculating the munitions' intended course and abruptly twirling out of the way. However, that meant that they had to ease up on the pursuit of the technocracy vessels. The Yodel were ready to bombard them with the particle beams as quickly as their weapons would allow. The Dirty had also diverted most of their remaining ships into a formation advance, and were using everything but the kitchen sink. That is, they were using whatever weapons they could have left over from the prolonged engagement. Kaiser had ordered our weapon station to hold their fire, and only now granted the permission to annihilate their target. With the Kolshians being pressed on all sides, our chosen target was paying no mind to any rebel fleet follow-up. I see the point of bringing the Dirtian shield forward. On their own, they pack very little claw strength, but with the drones ignoring them in favor of greater threats, they can choose their marks unimpeded. The slim number of remaining Terran drones had drifted away from the Yodel's side as we stepped into the fold. Humanity's computer-piloted fleet mobilized beside the Dirtian shield, protecting their remnants in the scarce cases they were fired upon. My best guess was that the UN didn't want the Dirtian to start sustaining heavy losses and crumble with their already frazzled nerves. The brazen charge wouldn't hold if they started dropping like prey. I waited with impatience for our plasma railguns to recharge, wanting to pin down the Kolshians before they could craft an invasion strategy. The Terran nanodrones I'd spotted on the sensors earlier zipped towards any Kolshian drones who had resumed their pursuit of the Yodel. I could see that a few dozen technocracy ships had been on the receiving end of missile barrages, from debris scattered in the void. The microscopic humanoid automatons pounced on the enemy's lack of shielding, and I watched one swarm ram itself into a foe's thrusters. Well, it wasn't as decisive as a reactor strike. It was enough to immobilize the drone. A dirty and shield vessel moseyed up to it to mop it up, as even those foolish avians could take down a paralyzed target. Kaiser, how many more drones do you expect we need to kill before their algorithms recognize they've lost? I asked. Lisa shifted on her feet. If I may interject, I think that is not so simple. The Shadow Fleet has the kind of numbers that losses aren't their concern. Should the algorithms assess that the battle is lost, I imagine they'll shift their focus to taking out as many souls on Kalqua as possible before going down. This has always been about teaching the Dirtian a lesson. Their aim was to engineer the complete eradication of the species that defy them, so I cannot argue against your conclusion. My question to the runt, to Kaisel, stands. What's the number where it is decided that all is lost? The scrawny Arxor lashed his tail. In my estimation, we have already crossed that threshold, sir. Between the Yodel, us, and the Dirty and Shield scoring kills, I count 6,500 fallen enemies. If there's anything the Calamari want to try, they have to make that push while they still have the numbers. I squinted at my viewport, assessing where a push might come from. several Shadow Fleet drones had ramped up the pressure on the Technocracy vessels, despite understanding it left them vulnerable to the 3 species covering the Yodel. Another contingent was feinting towards the Dirtian homeworld, knowing full well that the Terrans would ram automatons into their foes if needed, to stop them from drawing close enough. The final break-off group I spotted was waltzing into our crosshairs, right into the waiting missiles that we'd conserved to avoid such a head-on assault. Between all of these ostensible last-ditch efforts, there was a small number of hostiles that were unaccounted for. With the Dirtian closing in on the Kolshians from the planet's direction, the Terrans functioning as a middleman, and us backing up Yodel and heading from our systems out of bounds, that left a single avenue of possibility. The only path to slip away was to blaze off horizontally, while locking the other engagements into a limited area. It was difficult to detect which direction they would have chosen, with the craft having escaped visual range. Debris, coarse data, and a slew of active weapons were drowning out sensor leads in the sea of information. Rather than allowing the Kolshians to dilute our senses, we needed to filter out the irrelevant matters. I hurried over to the sensor station to preside over the full array and moved Kaisel out of the way without explanation. Despite grasping that it would leave us blind to target lock, I switched off all data correlating to in-fight weapons. My next subset to subtract was anything less than half of a ship length. Even though that would entail manual spotting to avoid flying into debris or friendly nanodrones, it still remained difficult to pass a particular group of renegades from their bodies, so I resorted to removing all vessels which had been marked as friendly. It was less than ideal to not know our partners' vectors, on top of not viewing their weapons' trajectories. However, if my theory was correct, we had little time to mitigate the Shadow Fleet's plan to double the casualties on Kalkwa. I pointed with my claw to faint energy signals. "Peel back! See those readings here? The Shadow Fleet snuck some ships off that way. To bomb Kalkwa. Send our fastest craft after them."
"Now send word to the United Nations," Lisa chimed in. "They'll be responsible for filling in the Dirtian shield, who I'm sure have been so pleasant to work with."
Oleski narrowed his eyes.
"I will tell the Yodel, though I don't imagine they have a hope in intercepting ships that are closer to us. We have to stop these squids. Each drone probably only has 1 antimatter bomb aboard, but if there's a few hundred ships, that's—"
"We do learn arithmetic on risk, contrary to common beliefs. That would induce more city hits than they've already racked up in some of the battle. Over 1 billion more dead. Unlike Kalsum's fools, the Kolshians have been strategic enough to take out key military strongholds and seats of government across Kalkwa already. So now, it'll be pure population."
"The Dirtian will have a fraction of their former power. As is, they may lose their deciding stake in the Shield Alliance," Lisa postulated. "That might be for the best, except that they're now the driving force in hating the Federation. Plus, their manufacturing capacity is second to none in their little group."
"We cannot afford to lose virtually all of their major urban centers, yes? The fastest ships in the rebel fleet have already received the communique to pursue this vector, but we will trail behind to supervise. Divert all power to propulsion."
Kaisel squinted. "With respect, sir, we cannot hope to catch them in a ship of our size. I do not know that our speediest vessels can catch them."
"They did not specify thrusters. Lisa, your job is to get us in touch with the Dirtian shield through the UN, charge our warp drive through the standard stationary protocol, and coordinate a fraction of a second for us to warp to their intended destination. My hope is that we are in and out before the Kolshians notice the opportunity. Get a small enough number of our other ships' warships to jump at the same time, but not enough that the drones notice that we're prepping for warp to become wise to it."
Peacekeeper Reynolds ducked ahead. "I'm on it, sir. I'll coordinate with navigations." "Pardon my audacity for asking questions, Domineering Chief Hunter, but if we're catching up through FTL, why are you sending the speedy ships after them at sublight velocities?"
The Arxel Run spoke up. "It's a mere diversion, Kaisel, so that they think we're going after them in the hopeless fashion." I paced back to the captain's station, allowing him to resume full control of the sensor hub. "What do the prey accuse us of so often? It's a ruse." The gravity disturbances of FTL disruptors were preventing warp travel now. If the Kolshians realized that they'd have the opportunity to slip into subspace, that would allow them to poke their units directly through the orbital range. It was quintessential that they wouldn't have the slightest clue of our intentions, and that the field was reasserted as soon as it was opened. This might mean that we'd be thrown back into real space the hard way, but despite the unpleasant variables, this was the only way to catching the Kalkwa-bound bomb toters. It was a necessary gambit for the continuance of the Dirtian as a galactic power. This entire rescue mission was a pointless waste of resources if this doesn't succeed. Beyond the senseless loss of life that would mirror an Orcs raid, I hoped to never see a planet come to that again, so this must work. As we stalled in position, protected on the far reaches of the rebel fleet, I watched the warp drive uncoil suitably to chart a path. If I had time to process what was unfolding, I might have even been nervous, despite my immense battle experience. However, it was over before I realized that it started. My command ship lurched into subspace before our violent expulsion as the disruptors went back up near instantaneously. In that sliver of time which was imperceptible to any life form, we'd punched our ticket ahead of the Shadow Fleet's path. Our warship could stand in the path of the incoming bomb-bearing foes. The havoc the FTL disruptors wreaked on our biology wasn't something that could be trained away. The sudden transition confused the senses. The skin wrapped around my brain felt too tight. My ears bore the sensation of being turned inside out as deafening bells rang within. My body temperature was climbing like I was under a sun lamp, and my eyes were projecting psychedelic patterns onto everything I saw. An unspeakable level of vertigo made it difficult to think, let alone direct my equally dazed soldiers into battle stations. The humans had turned flushed shades of red, and were on the floor struggling to coordinate movements. A growl rumbled in my throat as I leaned against my station with the full force of my weight. "Divert power! Back to weapons!" I huffed. "Move!" The weapons technician slumped against the buttons, managing to move a paw that weighed a ton to the needed buttons. He collapsed with exhaustion after completing a sequence. I swiveled my slowly normalizing vision back to Kaisel. The Oxel runt was on his knees. Judging by the concerned look in his eyes, he couldn't read the overlay. I tried to consult my own, but the dots all bled together through the blur. My eyelids squeezed shut in merciful darkness for a few seconds, and I sucked in measured breaths. My gaze snapped back open with renewed focus, allowing me to gauge the situation. The Kolshian drones were mere seconds from arriving, so I hoped that my crew could shake off the FTL disruptor's effects in the next few moments. To my surprise, there were a small handful of Terran drones and Dirtian shield vessels that had made the jump with us, forsaking their counterparts for the good of Kalkwa. At least, the friendly automatons couldn't be shaken by the transition effects of biologics. The rebels on my bridge got their tails back into motion and tended to the now ready plasma railgun. We had to throw everything we had at the Shadow Fleet. I straightened with pride, despite how much the Segway had taken out of me. "Orcs are the finest warriors in the galaxy. We stop them. We stop the Federation here." Confident growls echoed across the bridge as my followers tapped into their strength reserves. The Dirtian shield still looked a bit listless, so their fire might be a bit behind our initial volley. Kaisel zoomed in on the Kolshian drones, and with startling efficiency, our plasma weapon fired. Two other rebel friendlies targeted the same vessel from different angles, making invasion improbable. The automaton fired off a desperate stream of missiles before it was blasted into oblivion. Terran robots deployed a stream of interceptors to neutralize the parting gift. I didn't wait for the light and the reactor explosion to die down before ordering weapons to unleash the missiles that we'd been preserving to save our own hides. The meandering Dirtian shield caught on enough to dump every missile they had at the oncoming missiles, since that was an easy task to complete. Terran drones forged ahead of us, cruising along vectors that put them on collision courses. Despite the continuous resistance, the Federation were getting close to orbital range of Kalkwa. The fractional contingent of craft that we warped here had to put a swift end to the few hundred Shadow Fleet bogies. "I never thought I'd be fighting side by side with leaf-licking apes and Dirtian shield," I muttered to myself, before bellowing orders at a pitch where my crew could hear. "However fast is the quickest you can get that plasma gun online. I want it done faster. Throw everything but the kitchen sink at them. If we have it in stock, use it. Zal will definitely have to afford us some maintenance and restocking after this escapade. Our resources are limited, and now depleted. Our interceptors were repurposed to be hurled at the drones, hoping that anything that landed would hinder their approach. The Dirtian shield had finally brought their plasma guns alive and was spitting off beams in defense of Kakwa. The Shadow Fleet dispensed shield-breaking missiles of their own across our joint line before returning another round of plasma, tailored towards the Dirtian ships. I saw that, with a small number of ships that we had in our way, our enemy intended to push through the weakest link. 3 craft might fall, but one making it through would lend a consolation to them. There had been a negligible number of Terran drones to protect the Dirtian from their folly, and the Orcs or Rebel fleet was otherwise occupied with targets of our own. After running the mental math in my head, it was clear to me that we couldn't stop every planet-bound vessel alone. We had to handle what was in front of us. Due to the efforts I'd led, my forces were cutting down 200-odd ships that would have ravaged the planet. It spared Kalkwa the majority of the damage, but despite our heroic victory approaching certainly, it wasn't possible here to save the homogeneity from a few final losses. The Dirtian shield failed to hold their defensive line, and Kolshian drones broke through the final stretch to orbital range above the inhabited world. The Dirtian pivoted in desperation, with a few desperate enough to save their loved ones that they mimicked the actions of the Terran drones, ramming into the bombers. Though most hostiles became easy pickings due to taking no action to protect themselves, about 5 dozen enemies made it through to their destination. Plasma beams and missiles struck true against the genocidal metal hunks, but it was too late. The shields tossed kinetics at the antimatter payloads, hoping against hope to strike the fast-moving warheads, yet knowing it wouldn't work. In rote silence, my claw switched onto his comms channel to hear the yodel declaring that they were cleaning up the last remaining Kolshian hostiles back in the warp point. A dark part of my soul almost admired how the Shadow Fleet sacrificed thousands in a losing battle to increase their casualty count. Our intervention had saved the Dirtian from total extinction, and it was an effort that would garner respect from the United Nations. It remained to be seen how this would affect relations between the homogeneity and the sapient coalition, but it might even open the birds' minds to cordial relations. However, as 60-plus antimatter bombs delved into Kalkwa's atmosphere, I couldn't feel any sense of triumph. Today was another bleak mark on the Federation's blood-stained history in this galaxy. End of chapter. There is a new legend on the horizon. Blueberry Cat has taken the T6 Patreon spot. Thank you very much, and I'm sure that I speak for everyone when I say that. I would just like to thank our T5 members, Lord Azrakel, Ambrose Cattell, Quantum Wednesday, Dragzoon W.R.E, Blueberry Cat, Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholtz, Bushmaster 177, and Leslie 517. Thank you very much.